The soft light of the lamps illuminated the room of a luxury hotel on the California coast. Outside the window, behind the wide, transparent curtains, you could see the waves gently rolling onto the shore, creating an atmosphere of calm and serenity. But in the heart of this luxurious interior, a forbidden passion was raging. Jeremy Phelps, a man of about 55, with tired but alert eyes and a habit of avoiding unnecessary conversation, stood silently by the window. He was watching the ocean, as if trying to find answers to questions he hadn't asked himself yet. Next to him, on a wide bed with snow-white sheets, Anna, a 19-year-old student with dark hair that fell carelessly over her shoulders and a light look that mixed playfulness with feigned innocence, was stretched out. "Are you sure we're alone here?" Anna asked, raising herself on her elbows and looking at Jeremy with a smile. "Of course," he answered quietly, not taking his eyes off the window. Anna knew that. She liked that Jeremy was always in control, that he made her feel not just like an adult, but an important part of his secret life. She stood up, moving closer to him, and put her hands on his shoulders. He finally turned to her, and for a moment his composure seemed to shake. "You're taking a risk. What if someone finds out?" she joked, but there was a slight note of concern in her voice. "No one will know if we leave no trace," he whispered, holding her close. After it was over, Jeremy went to the bathroom, leaving Anna alone. She lay there for a while, enjoying the moment of peace. Gradually, the sense of time came and the need to return to normal life. Anna began to get ready, hastily dressing, and realizing that she had taken off her earrings when they first entered the room. "Where are they?" she muttered, remembering how she had carelessly placed one of her earrings on the bedside table. But the earring was not found. She thought she must have dropped it somewhere in the room. "Jeremy, can you help me?" she called. "What's wrong?" He peeked out of the bathroom. "I think I lost one of my earrings." Anna shrugged. Jeremy didn't think much of it. He was used to strict discipline, used to cleaning up all traces, but fatigue and confidence in his own caution made him less vigilant. They quickly left the room, hiding their tracks as best they could, forgetting about the small item left on the nightstand next to the bed. Later, when the maid was cleaning the room, she would find a small gold earring on the nightstand and put it in the guest's lost and found bag, not realizing that this small item would be the first clue in a tangled, dangerous story. Anna and Jeremy will never return to this room again, but the earring they left behind will change their lives forever. The Phelps family home is located on the outskirts of the town, looking directly at the ocean. The surrounding peace and quiet, wide green lawns, marble walkways, and tall windows reflected the family's low-key but undeniable success. Inside the house, however, there was a silence that spoke more than any words. Anna met Nick by chance at a party. She, a young student from a middle-class family, was fascinated by his life, which, at first glance, seemed perfect. Nick was shy and a bit naive, but that only attracted her more. She felt that she could manage their relationship, that she was in control of the situation with him. His sincerity and kindness were something new and unusual for her. "You will know me better than I know myself," Nick once told her at the beginning of their affair, when they were sitting by the coast. Anna smiled then, but there was a hint of sadness in her eyes. Several months had passed since then. Their relationship developed smoothly, without drama or emotional outbursts. Nick took her to restaurants, introduced her to his friends, even tried to show her to his parents, although it didn't bring Anna any pleasure. She felt like a cold wall separating her from the world from his father, Jeremy Phelps, who, during their brief acquaintance, only nodded politely, not even looking her in the eye. This man seemed like a mystery to Anna. He did not have the usual warmth that Nick tried his best to convey in every gesture. Jeremy Phelps was completely different, cold, silent, as if isolated from all emotions. His relationship with his son was reduced to an exchange of short phrases, blank stares, and caution. During one such evening, Anna stayed with Nick for dinner in a large, luxurious dining room. It was just the three of them, Nick, his mother, and his father. Nick's mother remained silent for most of the evening, occasionally glancing at Jeremy as if afraid to break his usual silent detachment. Nick tried to keep the conversation going by talking about the university and his plans, but Jeremy showed no interest. Anna felt like a stranger in this space. She was intrigued by Jeremy's image, this calm, cold presence that seemed to hang over the entire house. She couldn't explain to herself why she felt a strange need to get closer to him, to touch this frozen mystery, to feel the cold power that enveloped Jeremy. Later, when she was alone with Nick, Anna thought again about her true motives. Nicholas was sweet and kind, but he lacked the daring and mystery that had really attracted her. She had always wanted a life of risk, mystery, and challenge. Nick, unfortunately, was not the one who could satisfy her thirst for something big and dangerous. It was this thirst, this craving for mystery and risk that led her to meet Jeremy. At first it was just curiosity, a desire to experience the forbidden. Gradually, however, this passion grew into something more. She liked to feel that she was one step ahead, that she was breaking all the rules by being with Nick, and at the same time immersed in an affair with his father. Anna knew it was dangerous, that everything could fall apart at any moment, and this thought only fueled her interest. She saw something in Jeremy that was missing from her own life, a restrained passion, a capacity for risk, even cruelty. She felt like she was playing with fire, but she couldn't stop herself. It was this flame that drew her in more than any moral standards or prohibitions. That evening, as she left the Phelps home and Nick walked her to the door, she found herself thinking that she could not turn back. She had been drawn into a dangerous game of her own making, and now there was only one thing left to do: go forward until she reached the end, whatever that might be. At home, in the darkness of his office, Jeremy Phelps sat reflecting on their last meeting. He knew it had gone too far, but the feeling of power over young Anna gave him a satisfaction he hadn't felt in years. Several weeks had passed since the night Anna had last been at the Phelps house. Nick had become increasingly busy with school, a new project at his internship, and so their visits had become less frequent. Anna felt that his attention to her was waning, but she didn't worry about it. Her thoughts were increasingly occupied by Jeremy, his cold gaze, his reserved manner, his aloofness bordering on indifference, and at the same time, the feeling that this indifference was just a mask, hiding something much stronger. Thinking back to that short lunch when they crossed paths at the table, Anna recalled his intense, almost imperturbable gaze that lingered on her for a moment. She thought at the time that perhaps he had simply never looked at her seriously as a grown woman, but at the same time, she had doubts in her mind that perhaps this look hid much more. One evening, she received a message from an unfamiliar number. It was short and concise. "Meet me tomorrow at 8. Hotel Harmony. Jeremy." Anna froze in place, looking at the message. Her heart was pounding faster. This invitation was clear and unequivocal. He had made the first move, which meant her suspicions were not unfounded. She couldn't help but feel a sense of victory, as if her intrigue, manipulation, and games had brought her the desired result. But at the same time, there was something dangerous about the message, something that made her fearful. But fear only drew her more to this meeting. The next evening, when she entered the luxurious suite at the Harmony Hotel, Jeremy was waiting. He stood by the window, his back to her, watching the ocean at dusk. Anna stopped for a moment at the door, admiring his silhouette, and held her breath. He seemed to sense her presence, to feel her attention, and finally turned slowly. "You came," he said, his voice not a drop of surprise or a shadow of doubt. Anna nodded and came closer, trying to hide her excitement. She didn't like feeling so vulnerable, but now she realized that it was part of this dangerous game. "And what do you want from me?" she asked quietly, choosing the superiority tactic she had learned to use long ago. She wanted him to think that she was not afraid of anything. Jeremy was silent for a moment, looking at her as if trying to figure out if she was as confident as she seemed. His face remained reserved, but his eyes gave away something that went beyond the usual. He moved closer to her, and Anna could feel his cold, controlled breath on her lips. "I think you do," he finally said. His words were filled with deep confidence, as if he had already made a decision from which he was not going to back down. Anna felt his hand touch her shoulder, slowly moving down. It seemed to her that for the first time, she felt something like fear of this man. But her curiosity, desire, and a sense of forbidden freedom made her accept his touch, his power, which was seething behind the outward calm. "What about Nick?" she asked, more to test him than to get an answer. Jeremy was silent for a moment, but he did not withdraw his hand. His face remained unmoved, but his gaze changed, sharper, as if he were piercing her to the core. "Nick won't know," he replied shortly. There was something final and inevitable about that. Anna realized that this man was truly capable of doing anything to protect his desires and his life from unnecessary questions. She knew that she had just entered a game whose rules would be dictated by Jeremy, but that was what attracted her the most. They spent the evening together in a luxurious room where only the waves outside the window remained silent witnesses to their secret connection. For the first time, Anna felt like a part of a dangerous world, where every step is a violation of the usual norms, where fear and passion merge into a single whole. As Jeremy was about to walk her to the elevator, he leaned over and said quietly, "We'll continue this, but be careful. No traces." Anna smiled, pleased with his answer, but also surprised by the severity of his words. She began to realize that she was dealing not just with a man who decided to take a shine to a young girl. This was a man who controlled every detail of his life and who did not forgive mistakes. With each new meeting, which they carefully planned and hid from prying eyes, the passion between Anna and Jeremy grew. They managed to keep the secret, but it became more and more difficult every time. Each meeting revealed new sides of each other, pulling them into an abyss from which there was no way out. But despite their caution, they couldn't always avoid the little things that gradually turned their dangerous game into a game of lost and found. Anna was always careful, but once she forgot an earring in Jeremy's car. He noticed it too late when he returned home after their meeting, and he didn't have time to hide it. His wife could have found the earring, but he slipped it into his coat pocket at the last minute, keeping the trace a secret to himself. Now every meeting between them was imbued with this sense of risk, which fascinated Anna even more. She liked to feel the danger, the line they were constantly crossing. She was excited by the thought that their relationship might be exposed, that Nick might suspect something. But this only made their meetings even more exciting. One day when Anna and Jeremy were having lunch at a little-known restaurant far from the city center, several students from her university walked into the restaurant. She instantly became quiet and pretended that nothing had happened, but one of the guys' eyes lingered on her for a moment. Jeremy didn't even seem to notice, but Anna's insides were filled with anxiety. She realized that she was risking too much, and that any extra glance, any chance encounter could reveal their secret. The next evening, she met Nick at their usual spot on the beach. Their relationship had become somewhat chilly, and although Nick didn't notice a change in Anna, she increasingly found herself thinking that spending time with him was almost a burden. As he hugged her, she unconsciously felt her thoughts drift to Jeremy, and in her mind they increasingly merged into one. "You've been a little distant lately," Nick said, holding her hand, his eyes shining with genuine concern. Anna held his face for a moment. His soft features, kind gaze, calmness, and confidence that everything would be fine began to irritate her. She wanted to take risks, to test the limits, and at the same time, she couldn't afford to lose control of the situation. "Just a lot of studying," she quickly replied, trying to get back into her usual role. But Nick didn't give up. He looked at her intently, and for a moment his gaze was like he was trying to see something she was hiding. "If something's wrong, tell me," he said, his voice insistent but caring. "I just think you've become different." Anna tried to look away and pretended not to understand his hint, but inside she felt Nick's casual glance penetrate her protective walls. She realized that he had begun to suspect something, even if it was only intuition for now. He could sense that she had changed, and that was a dangerous signal. That evening, Anna returned home feeling anxious and angry at the same time. It became clear to her that she and Jeremy could no longer remain as hidden as before. They were leaving too many traces, too many details that were beginning to paint a dangerous picture. She needed a new strategy, something that would allow her to avoid detection, and at the same time maintain this secret affair that had become almost an addiction. In the days that followed, she and Jeremy began to meet even more cautiously. They carefully planned their meetings, avoided familiar places, and tried not to leave any evidence. But the idea that this could not go on forever was already firmly entrenched in her mind. She was attracted to the danger, but at the same time, every time they parted ways, there was a fear that their meetings had become too obvious. One day when she met Nick again at a family dinner at the Phelps home, she happened to notice Jeremy's eyes linger on her. It was no more than a second's pause, but she felt herself panic. It seemed to her that even this tiny glance could give away their connection. She tried to look down and ignore it, but a sharp residue of fear remained in her. When the dinner was over and the guests began to say goodbye, she saw Nick standing next to her father, looking at him with quiet admiration. Suddenly, Nick turned his gaze to Anna, and a shadow of suspicion flashed in his eyes, as if he sensed something more than what he could see. Anna grew cold at the thought that they were involved in a game where more and more details were giving away their secret. Weeks passed, and the latent tension that had been simmering in Anna and Jeremy's lives reached its peak. Every time she met Nick, even in everyday situations, she felt Jeremy's invisible gaze on her. His presence was like a shadow that always followed her, even when they were far away from each other. Anna realized that he was becoming more and more obsessed with controlling her. This both attracted her and frightened her, because his jealousy and control grew along with his overbearing, unpredictable behavior. Their meetings now resembled not only a forbidden passion, but also a violent confrontation. In each of his glances, in each touch, she could feel a possessive flavor. She had once been excited by his restraint, control, and caution, but now he was increasingly losing that control, and his emotions were breaking through all possible barriers like a flood. "Why do you keep seeing him?" he once asked during another meeting, his voice quiet but cold. Anna looked at him in surprise, trying to understand if he was serious. She couldn't believe that Jeremy, a grown man who had always controlled his emotions, would allow himself to be jealous of Nick. "You know why?" she replied, trying to keep her tone light. "Nick is my boyfriend, and we've been dating for a few months now. It's part of my life." "Part of your life?" Jeremy frowned slightly, and his eyes sparkled in a way she hadn't seen before. "I don't want you to be with him." Anna froze for a moment, shocked by his words. It didn't sound like a request or a question. It was an order. She felt that behind this coolness was something dangerous, something that could break her control over the situation. She knew that he was always used to getting what he wanted, but now it was beyond the pale. "Jeremy?" She tried to speak calmly, but her voice was shaking. "We have no promises, no obligations. I've always been honest with you." His face remained impassive, but Anna felt his gaze piercing her through. He was ready to act, and that scared her. Jeremy took a step closer and took her hand, pulling her close. His touch was strong, almost painful, and she saw his eyes glisten with barely contained emotion. "You don't understand," he whispered. "I can't share you with Nick." For the first time, she felt that their relationship was no longer just a risky game. It was something deeper and darker. Jeremy didn't want to let her be with Nick, and his jealousy was beginning to border on obsession. His prohibition sounded like a sentence, and she felt that she would not be able to escape his control now. From that moment on, their meetings turned into a complicated game in which Anna tried to keep the remnants of her freedom, but each time she fell more and more under his power. He would suddenly call her at night, demanding an immediate meeting to make sure she wasn't with Nick. He knew she was taking a risk, but that only made him more attracted to her. He enjoyed the fact that she was taking these risks for him, and at the same time, his obsession was eating him up inside. Anna felt like every meeting was a test for her. He insisted that she come only when he set the time, and it was beginning to wear her down. Each time he became more demanding, more cautious, and more rigid in his demands. She could no longer remain free. Her actions were controlled by his jealousy. One evening, when she was with Nick in a small cafe near the university, Jeremy suddenly called. She looked at the phone screen and quickly put it down, but Nick noticed and raised his eyebrows. "Who is it?" he asked casually, but Anna could hear a hint of curiosity in his voice. "Just a friend," she replied hastily, trying to change the subject. But as she left the cafe, the phone rang again. She looked around and, making sure Nick was still inside, answered the phone. "You should be more careful," Jeremy said coldly, his voice sounding like he'd been watching her for a long time. "What do you mean?" Anna felt her heart start to race. "It has to stop. Otherwise, I'll be forced to take measures you won't like." His words struck her, and for a moment, she thought she was in a trap from which she could not escape. Jeremy had lost all boundaries, and now he was ready to do anything to keep her for himself. When she finished the call, she looked back and saw Nick standing at the window of the cafe, looking at her with a slight misunderstanding and anxiety in his eyes. She hastily raised her hand to show that everything was fine and forced a smile, even though Jeremy's words were still echoing in her head. She had been fascinated by the feeling of danger, but now it was crossing all boundaries, becoming a poison that corroded everything in its path. She was trapped with no easy way out. The hotel room on the top floor, which offered a panoramic view of the Pacific Ocean, became a regular meeting place for Anna and Jeremy. In this hidden corner, they could always avoid unwanted glances by keeping their secret, but today the atmosphere was different. Anna, feeling the strain of Jeremy's constant claims and pressure, came with a heavy heart. She could no longer stand his jealousy and control, which were becoming more and more unbearable. Every call, every meeting, every word he said put pressure on her. She wanted to be free of this situation, which had long since turned into a trap that was squeezing her tighter and tighter. "We need to stop this," she said, barely entering the room and not even looking at Jeremy. She could feel his gaze growing colder and colder, but she knew she couldn't be with him anymore. Jeremy was silent at first, watching her. He slowly walked over to the window, looking down at the ocean, which shimmered in the sunlight. His face reflected an inner struggle, his anger gradually building, and he couldn't hide the anger that was raging inside. "You want to go to Nick, don't you?" he said coldly, his voice sounding angry. "You think I'm going to let you go like that? After everything?" "I can't live like this anymore," Anna replied, her voice trembling. "You want me to leave Nick, but I can't be with you anymore." Her words were the last straw. Jeremy approached her decisively, and his gaze became deep and sharp as never before. Anna felt real fear for a moment, taking a step back, but he didn't stop. His hand grabbed her shoulder sharply, and she felt his breath close to her. "You belong to me, Anna," he whispered, his voice full of bitterness and obsession. She pulled away from his arms, turning to the balcony, but he stepped forward, his face contorted with rage. Their argument escalated into a violent confrontation, and she felt his control finally break. At that moment, she realized that his jealousy had turned into anger that he could no longer contain. "Let go of me!" she shouted, trying to stop him, but he no longer heard her words. He took a step forward and, losing control, pushed her. Anna lost her balance and, stepping back, could not keep her feet. Everything spun before her eyes. She felt her body slide over the balustrade, and the next moment, she was swallowed up by emptiness. It all happened so fast that Jeremy was left standing, frozen, staring into the void, not believing what had happened. His breathing became labored. He involuntarily stepped back, and his eyes reflected panic. A moment later, a deep silence reigned in the room, as if hovering over him, enveloping his consciousness. Jeremy felt a wave of fear wash over him. He could not believe that this had happened. At first he looked at the place where Anna had just stood in confusion, and then, coming to his senses, he hurriedly approached the balustrade. Down there, on the concrete surface of the hotel terrace, was a motionless figure. People began to gather. Someone shouted in fright, calling for help. He realized that this could end in disaster. Returning to his room, Jeremy was about to run away, but suddenly stopped, realizing that he had left behind several important things that could give away their connection. He quickly gathered everything that could lead to a clue: Anna's phone, her belongings, napkins with prints, even the traces on the glasses they had used. He carefully cleaned the room, destroying all traces of their presence, as if it were his last chance to avoid being blamed. When the room was empty and clean, he took one last look at the balcony, at the spot where Anna had fallen. His hands were shaking, but his expression changed. He was ready to hide what had happened at any cost. Leaving the room, he calmly walked out the back door, confident that all evidence of their relationship had been destroyed. When paramedics arrived, the circumstances of Anna's death looked like an accident. The police examined the scene, and all signs pointed to a tragic fall. People just sighed with sadness, looking at the young girl's face, which was forever frozen in silent silence. But deep down, Jeremy knew that this secret would not remain hidden forever. Detective Brooke Dennis carefully examined the scene. She stood on the balcony from which Anna had fallen and slowly looked around the spacious terrace far below. Everything seemed to point to a tragic accident. A young girl had lost her balance and fallen. But Brooke's intuition told her that there was more to it than a simple accident. In her many years of experience, she had seen many such accidents that ultimately turned out to be well-disguised crimes. The housekeeper who was cleaning the room after the incident remembered one detail, an earring she had found under the bed when she was mopping the floor. Brooke picked up the earring and examined it carefully. It seemed strange to her because it was not on the list of personal items found in Anna's bag. It could have been forgotten by someone else, but Brooke was disturbed. Everything pointed to the fact that the girl was not alone in that room. The next day, Brooke gathered the necessary information about Anna and her life. The student, young, with a small social circle, was dating a guy named Nick Phelps. Brooke knew Nick's father, Jeremy Phelps, a well-known businessman in the city whom she had seen at various official events. Her intuition was that there might be more to Anna and the Phelps family than a simple relationship with Nick. In the course of the investigation, the detective began to check financial data, and that's when she discovered something unusual, a series of small payments from Jeremy Phelps' account to Anna. The amounts were relatively small but regular, which immediately aroused suspicion. These payments didn't look like official financial assistance or charity. They looked more like something else, something hidden. Brooke could not ignore this fact. She decided to question Jeremy carefully. He greeted her calmly, politely answering her questions, but there was a tension in his demeanor that he was trying hard to hide. "Mr. Phelps, did you know Anna Lawrence?" Brooke asked, trying to keep her tone calm and indirect. "She was dating my son," Jeremy replied, leaning back in his chair. His face remained impassive, but his eyes were intense. "You never met her in person?" the detective continued, watching his reaction. "I saw her a few times at lunch when Nick brought her to our house, but we never met in person," Jeremy answered confidently. But Brooke sensed that his words sounded too polished, like he was repeating a pre-prepared line. Her suspicions were strengthened. The payments, the found earring, these little details began to form a clearer picture. Brooke couldn't shake the feeling that Jeremy was hiding something. He was too tightly controlled, too reserved in his answers. She knew that people like Jeremy were skilled at hiding their secrets, but at the same time, it was their attempts to control every detail that gave them away. Leaving Jeremy's office, Brooke began to watch the surveillance footage from the Harmony Hotel. On the footage from the corridor, she found footage of Jeremy entering the room shortly before Anna fell from the balcony. She realized that this was another important piece of evidence that could hardly be attributed to chance. Brooke returned to the evidence, this time with more determination. She gathered everything: the earring, the security footage, and the unexplained payments. The feeling that this was not an accident but a well-disguised murder became almost an absolute certainty. Detective Brooke Dennis was finally convinced that Anna's death was no accident. The evidence was weak, but too many details pointed to Jeremy Phelps' involvement to be ignored. She knew that for a man like Jeremy, carefully covering his tracks was a matter of habit, but his excessive caution only made Brooke more suspicious. After gathering all the information she needed, she decided to conduct another interrogation with Jeremy, this time less formally but more pressing on his emotional control. She needed a moment of weakness, just one moment when his impeccable composure would break and reveal the true nature of his intentions. They met at the police station. Jeremy did not look so calm this time. His face was tired and his eyes were elusive. Brooke noticed small signs of his nervousness, a slight fidgeting of his fingers, an occasional restless glance at the door. "Mr. Phelps, we have some new information about the case," she began, her tone calm but authoritative. "This is a bit unusual, given that you have denied any personal relationship with her." "I was just helping her out as a father to her boyfriend," he said dryly, as if to justify his actions to himself. Brooke nodded silently, but her gaze remained wary. "And how exactly?" "Something indicates that your help was regular and not entirely official," she continued, keeping her eyes on him. "Besides, the earring that was found in your hotel room seems to be part of her personal belongings. Are you still insisting that it was an accident?" Jeremy's eyes flashed with anger, but he quickly extinguished it. "Are you accusing me of murder?" he asked sharply, showing for the first time a real emotion, the rage he had been holding back. "I'm just trying to understand what really happened," Brooke replied coldly. She waited for his composure to break completely, and it happened. Jeremy broke down, his voice trembling as he began to speak. Anna, was playing with me," he exclaimed, trying to justify himself. "She knew how to manipulate me, and she wouldn't let me rest. I wanted to protect my son. I didn't want him to know the truth." Brooke remained calm, though a shadow of gloating flashed in her eyes. She knew that this confession was the key. "So you really did meet her?" she asked, her voice remaining steady, as if she were just collecting another piece of formal information. Jeremy realized his mistake and froze for a moment. He was silent, trying to come up with an excuse, but it was too late. Brooke quickly picked up on his confession, turning his words into a testimony that could not be taken back. "Mr. Phelps, we have every reason to believe that you had something to do with her death," she said quietly but confidently. "I recommend that you don't say anything more until you have an attorney." Jeremy realized that he was stuck. His face grew pale and his eyes grew blank. He already knew that things were only going to get worse. He lowered his head, realizing that he could no longer make excuses. And in his eyes, there was a trace of regret for his actions, for his loss of control, for everything he thought he had under his absolute control, but which had ultimately led him to this point. The trial of Jeremy Phelps attracted the attention of the whole city. His case, a secret affair with his own son's girlfriend, jealousy that led to his death, and carefully hidden traces that eventually gave him away, became a sensation. The press blew it out of proportion, discussing every detail, and the public avidly followed the trial. The once respected and successful businessman now stood before the court, powerless to defend himself. The prosecutor's office presented the court with an earring found in the hotel room, surveillance footage, and bank transactions that confirmed Jeremy's connection to Anna. A particularly strong piece of evidence was his confession during interrogation, when he first broke down and admitted that he had a relationship with her and that he was overcome with jealousy. Jeremy's lawyer tried to justify his actions by claiming that it was an accident and that Jeremy did not intend to cause harm. However, the evidence and testimony of Detective Brooke Dennis was too compelling. After several days of hearing witnesses and analyzing the evidence, the jury returned a verdict of guilty of involuntary manslaughter with elements of premeditation. Jeremy Phelps was sentenced to 20 years in prison without the possibility of early release. Anna's family, who came to support her memory, expressed deep indignation and bitterness. Her mother wept during the court hearing, realizing that her daughter's life had been ruined by the selfishness and unhealthy obsession of a man they trusted. Her father, a reserved and silent man, tried to support his wife, but his eyes showed anger and pain. They could not forgive Jeremy, and even a harsh sentence could not fill the void left by the loss of their daughter. "He took away the only thing that mattered to us," Anna's mother said after the sentencing. For the Phelps family, the verdict was not only a disgrace, but also a final break. Nick, who had tried to stay out of the investigation and supported his father at the beginning, was shocked to learn the truth. He couldn't believe that his own father had not only had an affair with his girlfriend, but had actually led to her death. "He not only lost me as a son," Nick told reporters after the verdict, "he lost respect, trust, and everything that was important to our family. Nick's mother, Jeremy's wife, remained distant, trying to avoid public statements. For her, the case became a personal drama, where everything her life was based on turned out to be a lie. She filed for divorce, not even wanting to visit him in prison. After the verdict, Jeremy gave up. He no longer showed his pride and steadfastness. In the courtroom, he looked broken, realizing that he had lost not only his freedom, but also his family, his reputation, and all the connections that had been the meaning of his life. He realized that his life was over, and even imprisonment could not change his mistakes. His confession brought no comfort to Anna's family or to his own loved ones. It was just the result of the path he had taken, driven by greed and obsession. This case has left its mark on the lives of many. Brooke Dennis, who knew from the very beginning that the truth would come out, was relieved, but also somewhat bitter. Justice had been served, but the price for that justice was too high. The city will long remember this trial as a warning about the dangers of obsession and the desire for control.